This is our line plots interpretation practice, and perhaps the trickiest part of line plot questions is understanding exactly what part of the line plot data they want us to look at. So we're just going to spend a few minutes looking at the wording of the questions and how we have to actually be very careful about the wording and what it's asking. So we're going to start with these kind of simpler lower level questions using this line plot they've given us. And then we're going to look at a few of Mrs. Brown's questions that she has seen that can trick fifth graders a little bit if they're not being careful and paying attention to the wording of the questions. So what we have here is a line plot about science test scores. So you always want to check out the title and the labels so we know we're looking at the scores of different students' tests. There's also a nice informational paragraph above this that lets us know more information. Mr. Bradlee is very proud of all the students in his science class. They all studied hard and did an excellent job on last week's science test. Everyone in the class scored an 88% or higher. The line plot below shows the score distribution. So what that lets us know is that these X's all represent the students in his class, and that this is all of his students because it says everyone in the class scored an 88% or higher, which means we can go all the way down the line here on our plot. So we're going to start looking at a few questions here. How many students received a score of 94%? Pretty straightforward. You find your score of 94, and you can see there are how many students? Yes, 2. What was the highest score in the class? Now, as easy as this may look at first glance, be very careful because some people would be tempted to jump right here and say, oh, 100%. But if you look, there is no one who scored 100%. So if you're looking for the highest score in the class, you're looking for a student who actually got that score, which would take us down to 98%. What was the lowest score in the class? Not as tricky because the lowest score on our line plot is an 88, and there are several students who had that. How many students received a score in the 80s? So now we're going to look at what numbers would represent the data in the 80s, which would be for this 88 and 89. So we're looking at all of these students, which would give us how many? 10, correct. 10 students. 4 here and 6 here. How many students received a score in the 90s? So for this one, we're not going to include our 80s kids. We're going to look at scores in the 90s, which would be from here all the way down to 99. So we're going to be looking at all of these students and counting up how many of them scored in the 90s. So go ahead and count those up. What did you get? 17 students in the 90s, because there's 17 X's, which may represent 17 scores, which represent 17 students. How many students scored 93% or less? So this is actually getting to one of the trickier types of questions that we're going to look at in a second, because they really are getting you to look at a particular range of scores. So if it says who scored 93 or less, that means you're going to look to 93 or all of these lesser numbers on our chart. But the important thing here is that we are going to include the people who got a 93, because how many students scored 93 or less? 93 or less. So go ahead and count those up. And then you should have 16. And then last but not least on this page, how many students are in Mr. Bradlee's science class? So again, we know that this line plot represents everyone in the class, which means everyone took the test in the class. And so basically for this question, if you want to know how many students are in there, you're just counting up everybody who took the test. So you're going to count up every single X to know how many students were in his class. And you should get 27. Unless I counted wrong. If I counted wrong, comment on my video and let me know. Alright, now let's look at these last few questions and let's look at why these might trick 5th graders. They're not going to trick you, because you guys are going to be on top of this. But just in case, you know, we're talking about any other average 5th grader, let's just be really careful and pay close attention to the wording of the question. So, every one of these questions includes, or looks like it includes, the number 90%. However, most of these all have a different answer, because they're all getting you to look at a different range of the data. So range meaning what part of the data we're looking at for our answer, where it's stretching to and from. So, how many students scored? Higher than 90, at least 90, less than 90, and 90 or higher. Lots of 90 going on in there, but we're not going to always count these kids who got a 90, and that's where this gets tricky. Okay? So let's take it a little bit at a time. Higher than 90%. Well, do we want to count these kids? Are they higher than 90? And this is where the debate comes in with some 5th graders. In their head, they're like, oh, 90, and then they count all this way. But higher than 90 is not equal to 90. So we don't count these kids in this situation. So all we're going to count are the kids who got a score higher than 90, not exactly 90. So we would just be counting these guys. So that would only give us 14 kids. We did not count the people who got a 90, because 90 is exactly 90, not higher than. At least 90. This word right here gives 5th graders a lot of trouble. If I say you have to be at least 16 to drive a car, the lowest you can be is 16, but you can be as old as possible. So you can always be greater than 16. But if I say at least 16 to drive a car, then yes, you can drive it when you're 16. And that's how we want to look at this type of question. If it says who scored at least 90, then yes, we are going to count these kids who got a 90. We are going to count them because they got at least a 90. The lowest that matters is a 90. But we can also count all these guys who got higher than a 90. At least 90 means the lowest that matters is a 90, but it can go as high as we want. So that would be our 14 that we counted last time, 15, 16, 17 students. Alright, now we're looking at who got less than a 90. So this one is very much related to the first one we did. We were looking at higher than a 90, now we're going to look at less than a 90. So the question is, do I include these kids who have exactly 90? And the answer for letter C, if I'm looking for who got less than a 90, the answer here would be no, do not include them. Because 90 is not less than 90. I'm going to count these guys who actually scored lower than 90. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then last but not least, we have 90% or higher. So this is different than letter A. Letter A said higher than 90. So when we looked at these kids who got a 90%, we didn't count them for A because 90 is not higher than 90. However, for this one, if I say 90% or higher, then that means yes, 90% does count. So I will count these 90s this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because I can also go higher, which would make me have all 17. So it can be a little confusing to sit here and listen to me over and over and talk about these numbers, but I think the more you practice paying really close attention to this wording, the better off you'll be. And this is why I really hope that you're having the chance to get onto IXL and try out the line plot activities because they are very good at practicing all of this wording.